So I think mitochondrial dysfunction would be a huge one. I think, in my mind, that's, the mitochondria are, maybe the single most, important driver.
Hey, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. With me today is Dr. Gregory Kelly, who is the Director of Product Development at Neurohacker Collective, a naturopathic physician, and the author of the book Shape Shift. With extensive experience in both natural medicine and nutrition, he's been an influential figure in the field. He served as the editor of the Journal of Alternative Medicine Review and taught advanced clinical nutrition, counseling skills, and doctor-patient relationships at the University of Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine. He's also published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition, contributed 3 chapters to the textbook of natural medicine, and has over 30 journal articles indexed on PubMed. His areas of expertise include nootropics, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine, as well as weight management, sleep, and the chronobiology of performance and health. With no further ado, enjoy this conversation with Dr. Greg Kelly. So welcome to the show, Greg. Such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me today. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so there's a lot of things that we can talk about today, and I hope to get into a number of different topics with you. What I want to start with is cellular aging. And there's a number of studies that are actually older, and some articles in mainstream news like the LA Times, and some research out of USC and some other things that I found actually only recently that are 10, 20 years old. And they discussed something kind of mind-blowing that I'm curious if you know about, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on. But the gist of it was the notion that if we cure a particular disease, like they give the example, if all cancers were cured tomorrow, cancer is this thing for 100 years. We've been searching for the cure for cancer, the cure, for all these different types of cancers. If only we could cure all these types of cancers, we'd live so much longer. And they make the point that if we cured all cancers tomorrow, or all heart disease, the #1 killer, and many other diseases like this, it actually would only move the needle of the average lifespan that a person is living a very, very small amount. And the reason why I'll explain in a minute, but the general idea of this is that, well, let me just explain why. So the reason that what they explain as the reason why is essentially that these are age-related diseases that occur as a result of accumulated cellular damage and cellular aging, and that even if these individual diseases, cancer or heart disease or diabetes or neurological disease, were cured, that most people would still die in roughly their mid-80s as a result of what we call dying of old age. And dying of old age is multi-organ failure. Basically, so much cell damage and cellular aging has accumulated that the body is essentially just shutting down. So I think we are broadly, my hypothesis is that conventional medicine, and I think more broadly the functional medicine world, is under the delusion that by curing this or that disease, we are going to be healthy and live a much longer time. And I think what is really underneath it is still a body that has accumulated a lot of cellular aging, a lot of cellular damage, that even if you cured that particular disease, probably wouldn't live that much longer in most cases. So I think that this is a big deal like this, and I think it's not well understood by most people. And I think it shifts the conversation towards cellular aging as the rate of cellular aging as the really key thing that we need to be focused on if we actually want to live a longer lifespan and have a longer health span. So what are your thoughts on this landscape?
I would say that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess to put it in a frame, when I was a naturopathic student, mid-90s, we had a class on addiction. And one of the things I remember from that class is they drew kind of the upside down U curve, like the adaptational curve. And they said, okay, you first drink, you get pretty intoxicated. You keep drinking, you kind of adapt to that, reach a plateau at some point, and then, people that struggle with alcoholism, they're kind of on the downward curve. And one of the things that sunk in that presentation was they said, okay, now imagine, someone that's had a problem with alcohol. They're somewhere past the plateau, they're sliding down, and they, go to AA, or for some reason they stop drinking for a couple of years, and then they start drinking again. So where would they get back on that curve? Do they slide back, like towards like a better direction? Do they get back on the same point on the curve that they stepped off, or do they keep progressing? Any thoughts on what the answer we were given was?
I don't know.
So what they said is that when they drink again, it was as if they continued drinking. They get back on the curve as if they'd continued drinking during that 2-year interval. So akin to what you just said with, heart disease, cancer, the disease was progressing whether or not they drank, right? The drinking was just a symptom. And I think that analogy makes sense. Aging is going on no matter what on a cellular level, whether, we, get on or off like a disease curve, that cellular aging is still going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, assuming you agree with me, and do you agree with me that it would be a much wiser use of most people's focus, particularly if they don't already have a disease that they're actively trying to treat? It would be much wiser to focus on the rate of cellular aging, and on the, sort of from the broader meta level that we can speak about, as far as speaking to the broader population, speaking to the audience that we're now speaking to. The message, I think, should be, hey, if you really want to live a longer time and have a longer health span, don't rely on, waiting till you get a particular disease and then trying to find a cure for it or reverse it. Focus all of your energy and efforts on trying to slow down cellular aging. Assuming that you agree with me, how do you conceptualize cellular aging and aging more broadly, if you don't feel cellular aging is the proper term for it? What do you see as the physiological mechanisms or processes that are driving that?
Well, I think stepping back, so I would agree. And there tends to be two broad camps within the longevity community. One would be the general idea that aging is mostly because of damage accumulation in our cells and mitochondria, and that the goal then would be either repairing damage or cleaning it up. The other would be, it's usually called programmed aging, but the general idea of programmed aging is that for some reason, as we age, an epigenetic program is essentially executed that causes, more damage and acceleration. So in either case, damage isn't the hub. It's just what's, maybe the driving force. And so, fundamentally, I think, understanding more about cells and mitochondria, what causes them to either become like accelerated aging, or what, resources that they need, or, support they need to execute more of the repair programs, becomes foundational to healthy aging. And so that would be, I think we would both think that's the same, right? Like,
absolutely,
let's understand that piece, let's work on that. And if we can slow that down, cells are fundamentally the building block for tissues, and tissues for our health. So this would be an old naturopathic principle, but basically the health of a tissue is dependent on the health of the cells in that. And an analogy I used it for, to help some of our marketing people to understand something called cellular senescence we'll maybe get to. But think of like a gardener and a plant. There's just one plant, vital, all the leaves are green, robust, and now, a couple of the leaves start to yellow. But what a gardener will do is prune those away. That gives an opportunity now for new growth. It frees up the resources that were going to that damaged leaf to go now to the healthier things, and it keeps the whole organism healthier. But if we don't prune that yellow leaf away, it'll attract pests. It tends to now cause yellowing of nearby leaves, right? Like the whole plant suffers. And in that damage accumulation, we have something very similar to yellowing leaves going on in our cells all the time. And the question is how effective our immune system and other natural processes are at pruning them away. And one thing that's fairly clear from research is that the older we get, the less effective pruners we become, right? So things we can do that help to prune away those cells, I think would be a big part of keeping the organism healthy, if that makes sense.
It is. Now, I want to ask you something. I'm going to be very direct here, and this is something that I want to challenge you a bit here. Let me just find the specific guy that I'm referring to so that I can say specifics here. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Okay, so it's what I wanted to refer to is the ITP, Interventions Testing Program, and a guy named Richard Miller, who is one of the researchers. Are you familiar at all with this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
ITP is great. They do excellent research.
Okay, so maybe if you might be more familiar than I am, because I know you've gone deep in this space. Maybe you'll explain it better than me. But basically, the idea is, as I understand it, they essentially run rodent studies where they test different supplements and drugs to see if there is a signal in terms of improving longevity.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So one of the things that they do, so what you see in a lot of rodent studies is they'll use the Johnson lab strain of mice, the specific designation, but it's basically a mouse model of metabolic syndrome. So as an example, nicotinamide riboside and MN, almost all of those studies have been on the Johnson lab mouse, and those don't tend to reproduce in humans, I guess, to put it simply, right? They have a genetic defense that makes them a great candidate for metabolic syndrome that we just don't share. So one of the things that ITP does is they use wild type mice, so genetically diverse strains of mice, to more accurately try to capture what would happen in a genetically diverse population like the humans. And they also then have 3 different labs, so they'll try to replicate. So instead of like what you see sometimes in science, will be a great result at one lab, but it won't be replicated at others. So they're really doing their best to use animals to try to get the best insights possible on what may be worth exploring in humans.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. And I've gone a few years ago, I went deep down the rabbit hole of the genetics of mice that are being used in most scientific experiments. And you find a lot of very unpleasant stuff there that, how much inbreeding is going on and using these genetically inbred mice over so many generations, and how that may, as you implied there, may obscure a lot of the findings in some of that research and how much it translates into humans. Okay, so on the topic of cellular senescence, one of the most popular ingredients is fisetin. And this is something that, I looked at, I know you guys have looked at, and I looked at when I was formulating my longevity formula. And the research looks super positive. There's tons of very, very positive research. And then I listened to an interview with Richard Miller where he was talking about testing fisetin in their mice for longevity. And he tells the story. I can't recount all the details of the story, but he talks about some of these manufacturers of fisetin coming to him to get the fisetin studied. And that basically the gist of it is they studied it in multiple labs, and it even studied it over long periods of time at high dosages, and they found zero effect. And he talks about this kind of with a smirk on his face, saying like, hey, a lot of these companies, they fund their own research, kind of like pharmaceutical companies, they fund their own research, and then they get these very positive findings. But when we do the research in our tests, in our labs, we can't replicate that finding. And to be honest, it's kind of, as a supplement formulator myself, I know you guys are involved in that as well. Like, it's kind of depressing just to realize that so much of the studies that maybe we want to believe in are not that legitimate. But so there's fisetin. I know there's some other compounds that are also thought to combat cellular senescence, but what's your take on kind of all of that?
So I saw, the only thing I've seen was him on a podcast talking about that research.
Uh-huh.
It's not been published anywhere.
Right.
Usually they'll eventually publish their research. That hasn't been. And one of the groups I follow is called Fight Aging with an exclamation mark.
Right.
Reason is the person that has that. And my understanding of at least what's been communicated is that the thought is that they actually used a much lower dose than what Mayo and Scripps have used in their research. So Mayo and Scripps collectively were the ones that did the original study that identified fisetin as a senolytic compound, both first in vitro, because that's how it would work, and then as a candidate. The last time I looked, there was 10 human studies registered on clinicaltrials.gov, all using generally a 20 milligram per kilogram dose of fisetin, which is a lot higher than what you would normally see in supplements. Usually, I think yours has 125 milligrams per dose, but usually somewhere in that 100 is what you see. But that would be 1,400 plus in an average size human. So right. I think one. It's always important to wait till you can read the research and see what they've done, because the truth is there's now been dozens and dozens of different labs that have used fisetin and measured something to do with senescence in different animal models. So, I think ITP is great, but I don't know that, their findings would outweigh all the other findings, because, Mayo and Scripps are legitimate research endeavors as well.
Yeah. Excellent response. Are there any other compounds that you're excited about with regards to combating cellular senescence?
Well, by far the two most used is the combination of dasatinib and quercetin, by far.
And did that was a pharmaceutical you mentioned, right?
Yeah. So dasatinib is it's like a drug used typically for blood cancers. And the idea, I guess we can maybe back up for a second, but cellular senescence isn't a new concept. It goes back to Hayflick's work in 1961, where cells in a culture will only divide so many times before they'll just stop, right? So that was eventually termed cellular senescence, and so that's been known about 60 years. But what happened around 2010 was the recognition that these senescent cells seem to be a big part of the aging as damage control. And then in 2015, Scripps and Mayo found that selectively removing them could rejuvenate tissues. Again, mouse studies. And the thing that they did originally was they looked at the mechanisms, like what's going on to keep senescent cells alive. And that brings us back to that pruning yellow leaves. So that I think in a general sense, when cells get stressed, they execute a range of different programs depending on the amount of stress. But in a simple sense, the first thing they try to do is defend themselves. So antioxidant defenses would get upregulated, and as an example. If the stress is, more than that can account for and causes a little bit of damage, then you have things like autophagy, which is a repair program, recycling things inside cells and mitochondria, or repairing DNA. So we have things in our cells that can do those. If stress is beyond that, then that's when you would either have one of three things happen. Those cells will become senescent. They'll go through apoptosis, which literally translates as falling off. So very much think of like that yellow leaf falling off the plant, or they'll go through necrosis, which is just think of the like trauma from an accident, like it wasn't a planned dying off, trauma caused it. So depending on the degree of stress, one of those things will happen. And sometimes the same stress, like a higher dose, will cause senescence instead of autophagy, as an example.
Mhm.
So with like the key thing with cellular senescence is it's part of the healthy response that our cells make so that these damaged cells won't reproduce themselves. And what would happen in, say, a 20-year-old? So senescence isn't in and of itself a bad thing. It's contextual. So 20-year-old, decides to do an intense workout, they're going to make some senescent cells. Super important that they do because those help to bring the immune system into that tissue. They help with repair and rejuvenation. But a week, 10 days later, those senescent cells would have been cleared out. So thinking back to that analogy of a plant, some leaves would have yellowed, but they would have fallen off the plant. What happens is we get older, that same intense exercise, they've done this work in animals, the older animal will create senescent cells as well, but a week, 2 weeks later, they haven't fallen off. They're still there. And then they can make essentially new senescent cells as well. That's the zombie metaphor we often hear. So the key thing for me when I think of senescent cells is that I use the distinction transient versus lingering. It's completely natural and healthy to make these transient ones that fulfill a role and then they fall off the plant or the immune system prunes them off. As we get older, for a lot of reasons, that just doesn't happen, so they build up in our tissues.
Okay, so there's one nuance here that I think might be important. So you gave the example of exercise creating senescent cells in this situation, and the idea here is you're not really trying to say exercise specifically is a concern for here, but I think what you're trying to say is any source of high levels of oxidative stress that exceed the cellular capacity to handle that stressor that then results in a high level of damage to the cells, that's what causes senescence, correct?
Yeah, so they would so there's that Hayflick limit, right? Like telomere shortening, it was once thought that was the main reason for cellular senescence. But in addition to that, it's what would be called stress-induced premature senescence. So long before a cell would have short telomeres, you can cause it to become senescent by UV light, nutrient deprivation, all these different things that would stress a cell. And okay, my bias is in aging, that's the more likely cause of cellular senescence is these, like too much stress.
Okay, and but
go ahead.
So let's create a distinction here that I personally think is important, that the distinction between the presence of a stress versus the presence of a stress that exceeds that individual's capacity to handle stress. So let me be more direct about stating this. You gave the example of exercise creating damage that induces senescent cells, yet we can also find research showing that people who exercise reduce their accumulation of senescent cells. So just explain that seemingly paradox to people.
Yeah, so again, go back to that idea of transient and lingering. It's completely normal when cells or tissues are trying to repair, which even like modest exercise, part of that we remodel, say muscle, say we lift weights. The goal is to make, this is the way I would think of it, right? Muscles get bigger and stronger, not so much because we lifted weight, but because we're a complex adaptive system. They're like, oh, the goal is to be better prepared for the future. So, right. Oh, I better be bigger and stronger for the next time this stress happens, right? So stress is not, like you mentioned, like not good or bad. Is it an amount that can cause a positive adaptation? And then things that we would make in that remodeling process are completely fine. We need them. It's when they last past that and interfere with other things. So the key thing with exercise is that in a young animal, they'll make these transient senescent cells. They'll do their job for a couple of days and then they're flushed out of the tissues. In older animals, when they study, they're made, but they're not removed. And so so exercise, we could say, it's just an example, right? So like intense stress, but right, as you suggested, things that keep an organism healthy will tend to slow the accumulation of senescent cells. So exercise is one of the only things so far that's been repeatedly studied and seems to slow down the accumulation of senescent cells, but it's very tissue specific. So in general, senescent cells can accumulate, well, they tend to accumulate in 3 tissues disproportionately. So three cell types: fibroblasts, which think connective tissue, right? Joint tissues, skin, fibroblasts are like widespread connective tissue. The immune system, and then endothelial cells. So endothelial lines are arteries and veins. But any tissue, even it used to be thought that senescent cells only were in dividing cell, or only dividing cells could become senescent. And the idea was, why would we execute this program if a cell wasn't going to divide? And neurons, as an example, are a non-dividing cell. The neurons we have now, we don't really, there's very limited neurogenesis, the ability to make new ones. But now they know that neurons can become senescent. So because of that, they think senescence is much more like, again, that damage protection when stress has been too high or too sustained. So, and then again, the idea would be, once a cell becomes senescent, it should then on its own either go through this natural falling off process, apoptosis, or the immune system should find it and remove it. Mm-hmm. So senescent cells shouldn't linger. They should do their job and then be, go through this natural, again, like the yellow leaf, falling off a plant or someone pruning it off. The key distinction with age is that more and more yellow leaves just accumulate in our tissues.
Mm-hmm. Got it. What are some of the other main drivers of accelerated cellular aging?
So I think mitochondrial dysfunction would be a huge one. I think, in my mind, that's, the mitochondria are, maybe the single most, important driver, because, I think at the most fundamental level, things are about energy. And, if anything impairs the ability of that mitochondrial network to perform its job, energy goes down. And that's a commonality with almost anything with health, is that there's just not enough energy to do the job that tissue needs to do.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as mitochondria are so interesting, because now we're finding more and more roles for them, right? When you and I were going through undergraduate and graduate school physiology, biology courses, it was very much just sort of, they're an organelle in the cell, they're the powerhouse of the cell, they take in carbs and fats, they pump out ATP, that's kind of all you need to know. Now we're discovering more and more they have all kinds of roles, as involved in immune regulation, as environmental sensors, energy regulation, and that they are really kind of the central hub of the wheel of metabolism, meaning like the totality of all the chemical reactions occurring in our body. They do a lot, it turns out, and they're really important. What's interesting is, I encounter many different people with kind of different paradigms around mitochondria and what they do and how to fix them. I would say now they're in vogue in the functional medicine realm, but I think most people's model of them is still very simplistic. It's sort of like, well, we run, an organic acids panel and maybe a few other tests that have some indirect relationship to mitochondria. And if we establish that you have mitochondrial dysfunction, then we give you, some acetyl L-carnitine and some ribose and some alpha lipoic acid and B vitamins and CoQ10 and PQQ and voila, your mitochondria are healthy again. But my personal view is it's not nearly that simple. What do you see as, like, how do you understand, what's your paradigm around the mitochondria and some of the key things that cause mitochondrial dysfunction?
But first I think of them as a network, so like in a cell, we don't have a mitochondria. We have a network of mitochondria that are, interacting, communicating, and network complexity science, I think, is a much better model. Mm-hmm. But the goal really is to create a healthy network, right? And the network's going to try to reshape itself to best match its circumstances, right? So exercise is an example. If, like, in general, exercise will cause a reshaping of the network. You'll have mitochondrial biogenesis, birth to new, fitter versions of mitochondria, and mitophagy, right? You'll prune away some of the, the less effective ones. So I think, like any living ecosystem or living adaptive system, it's going to try to do the best it can. And one of my, I guess, my metaphors is that, the key thing is making sure something's supplied with the resources to be able to, do what it's endeavoring to do and remove any obstacles that might be in the way. And that drastically oversimplifies it, but to me, that's the most useful construct. And the things you mentioned, I think of as in the resources bucket, right? The mitochondrial nutrients, for lack of a better way. So those are needed for the network to be able to do its job. So nothing wrong with those, but if there's an obstacle in the way, then you also need to do that, and you need to give a reason for it to reshape itself, right? So resources without exercise would be less efficient to reshape the network than giving it a reason to reshape itself with exercise. That makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I agree completely. Are there any other factors that you see as having a big impact on causing mitochondrial dysfunction?
So, I tend to follow Dr. Jack Kruse a lot, and his tribe's very into light, circadian rhythms, grounding. I would put a lot. I would maybe not be as full bore as them on those, but I think those are under-recognized. The fundamentals are, to me, the foundational pieces, right? So at one point, about 20 years ago, I was teaching naturopathic students their clinical nutrition class, and my first lecture was on body clock and circadian rhythms. My second one was on sleep, and the idea was those are the low-hanging fruit. It's much easier to try to get those things aligned with our lifestyle and environment than it is to work on, like, say, obesity as an example. That's, multiple things are impacting it. So I would say for mitochondrial health, they're fundamentally, they're what turns the energy or the electrons, right? The energy that, starts in the sun into, ATP in our cells. So I think the environment is, maybe the single most important factor dictating the health of the mitochondrial networks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any other big drivers of aging other than mitochondrial damage, dysfunction, and cellular senescence? Are there any other key players that you want to put into this mix?
Well, I know, like immunosenescence, right? So the immune system, it just performs vastly differently as we get older than in a younger, right? So I know you're familiar with it, and your audience probably is as well, like the hallmarks of aging paradigm. So there used to be the 9 hallmarks of aging, which were expanded to the 12 in January 2023. And the 3 they added were basically immune systems. So immunosenescence, dysbiosis, so the gut connection to aging, and then autophagy became its own. So I think, those 3 are also super valid. Autophagy, as I mentioned, I think of as similar to senescence. It's part of the suite of stress response programs that cells and mitochondria have. And ideally, that one's executed well before we have to enact the senescence program. The gut microbiome, I think, I bet 10 years from now, there'll be way more talk about the connection to the gut microbiome and aging, just because it's, again, like crazy complicated. I mean, there's somewhere on the order of 1,000 different species of gut bacteria in each of ours. Yours is different than mine. If you had a twin, you would have different. You might have the same DNA, but you'd have different gut microbiomes. They make about 100,000 metabolites. There's, it's our second biggest connection of neurons outside the brain, is the enteric nervous system. So like think of just the magnitude of those interactions, 1,000 species and hundreds of thousands of metabolites with, almost as many neurons as our brain. And, most of our immune system is in our gut. So I think it's a tough system to sort out, but my guess is it's a pivotal one for aging.
I know you guys are going to release a product related to that soon. Do you have any insights into like what you feel are maybe strategies or nutrients or supplements that are uniquely beneficial for supporting one's microbiome?
Yeah, so the analogy I use is an ecosystem, and I think it's like the best one for the gut. And in an ecosystem, so Yellowstone, I remember the video when they reintroduced the wolves into Yellowstone, and how over the next couple of years it completely reshaped that ecosystem. So wolves would be thought of in an ecosystem model as a keystone species, right? A species that just has a disproportionate impact on that ecosystem. Elephants in Africa would be another example. They just have a huge impact. And so on our gut, I think that idea of keystone species is really important. And some of the keystone species are sometimes now called next generation probiotics or next generation organisms. They're, your Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, Pautzniae, some things in that category where, the things that I think of it as probiotics 1.0, the Lactobacillus, the bifidus, are not keystone species. So not to say they're anything wrong with those. They're important inhabitants in the ecosystem. But I think, I know our goal when we were, reading the research was to figure out what had the biggest impact on the keystone species. And that tends to be certain things in the prebiotic world, like resistant starch, as an example. Bifidobacteria is one of the species that feeds on it, but another, I think it's Ruminococcus is the genus. That's a keystone species that's also a primary degrader. And what often happens is then it's called cross feeding. The metabolites those make then feed something else. So a small amount of resistant starch tends to cause Akkermansia to also bloom, as an example, even though Akkermansia doesn't directly feed on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of either a positive virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle in the other direction when you have those cross species interactions where they're benefiting from the presence of the other species. And then if you take too many courses of antibiotics and some of those keystone species dwindle in numbers, then other beneficial species also dwindle and pathogenic species can flourish. And yeah, agreed. Very, very complex system. Okay,
so I think, I was just going to say,
go ahead.
Another just insight is, like what I've seen in quite a bit of research, they'll just feed high amounts of one prebiotic, so like inulin or GOS. And what that doesn't create a diverse ecosystem, right? Like you're almost disproportionately feeding something, but starving other things. So I think just one message for the audience is you're probably better off lower amounts, but a variety of prebiotic type things for the, to create a more rich gut ecosystem.
Let's talk about, well, you know what? We talked a lot about mechanisms as far as aging. I'm curious on a practical level, as far as one's lifestyle habits, what would you say are some of the biggest drivers of aging, and what would you say are maybe 2 or 3 of the things that you think are the most powerful anti-aging strategies one can engage in?
So I think the biggest drivers are things that, so an analogy that I used in my book was when I was a kid, it was called The Last Straw or the Camel's Game. So this goes back to the late 60s. And the gist of it was there was a plastic camel, there was buckets on either side. You would spin a wheel, and whatever color it landed on, you would put a straw of that color in. And some of the straws were denser than others. And that at some point, one team would spin the wheel, get, say, like a blue straw, put it in, and that was the last straw. The back would collapse. And I tend to use that as like an allostatic stress model. So all of us can carry a certain amount of stressors. Right? Like we've got some innate ability to weather the storm, so to speak. And we all have, some straws in our basket. And, I think most of us, and it's probably unknowable, like how close we are to that last straw. So what you commonly see in health is the results of that last straw, right? There'll be this one tipping point event that caused the back to metaphorically collapse, right? And that's often then thought of, oh, that was the cause of the problem. And in my model, no, like it was all the other straws there in advance, right? Like the last straw would have been meaningless if the basket was empty. So fundamentally, like my model is, what are the removable straws? And the biggest ones, so again, whether it's health or aging, I think it's going to be the same, right? It's the things that have like that disproportionate amount of weight in our basket are the ones that cause the largest problems. And the removable ones, or the actionable ones, are the only ones we're focusing on. So, I believe Cellular when he said that he and Cellular was, the preeminent stress researcher. He coined the idea of biological stress. He believed after all his work that mental and emotional stress was the biggest, in my analogy, straw. So I think, when there's mental emotional stress, resolving that, whatever that means, right? I often use the idea of congruence or incongruence. So, if, like as an example, I have a much younger brother. When he was 20, he thought eating at McDonald's was grand. I was a vegetarian at the time. If I had eaten, not only would I have, had any like effects, physiologically from that, but I would have been incongruent because I was doing something I believed was bad. If that makes sense, right? So closing incongruences is big. If there's the bigger the gap is that something's incongruent for us, I think the bigger the straw. Another thing I would focus on is something consuming our mental bandwidth, right? Are we ruminating about something? If we are, that's a really strong clue that that's consuming a lot of our mental bandwidth, obviously, but that's likely a big straw. Is there something we can do to close that loop, right? So that, that rumination would be behind us. So that would be one big area. Sleep is huge, right? And just so mismanaged in general in our population. Statistically, I worked for a corporate wellness company for about 7 years as one of the jobs I had, and we would have a standardized like health risk assessment questionnaire. We had all the employees, and I mean, it was somewhere about 60% of the people would just in their answers would be telling us that they don't get enough sleep, right? And that was people that were aware of it. So I think sleep is huge, and maybe not in our world, right? We talk a lot about sleep. We do a lot of things to make sure we get it enough. But I think in society as a whole, sleep is just really poorly managed.
Yeah.
And then I think screen time has got ridiculous for many people. I know my screen time went through the roof during lockdown, and so I think. It's often we don't have to overcomplicate it. What are the most fundamental things to our health, right? And it's, our thoughts, doing the things that we evolutionarily would have encountered and thrived on.
Mm-hmm. Since you brought up sleep a minute ago, I'm curious to get your thoughts on melatonin. It seems to be quite the controversial topic in our space. Or not even necessarily that controversial, but the diversity of views, I would say, is pretty dramatic. I believe that you guys in your sleep formula did not use melatonin, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
I've gone back and forth on this for a long time and talked to a lot of experts and dug into the research and talked to a lot of people to assess their interactions with melatonin. I'm uniquely sensitive to melatonin. So I actually paradoxically respond with poorer sleep if I take a typical melatonin supplement. And I often have disturbed sleep and I wake up groggy. With some exceptions, with herbatonin, small doses of herbatonin, which is a plant-based compound, which is what I'm putting in my new sleep formula that's coming out, I actually have a very good response to that. I don't know exactly why, to be honest with you, because I've also tried microdosing the synthetic melatonins, and I don't get the same response. I seem to get a very nice response with the herbatonin plant-based melatonin, but not consistently with other types. As far as the diversity of opinions that's out there, it's everything from supplementing with melatonin is bad for you and will disrupt different mechanisms in your body to some people, prominent people in some cases, claiming that you should be using massive doses of melatonin, on a nightly basis. So I'm curious what your take is and why you guys decided to not use melatonin in your sleep formula.
Sure. So I can speak to that for sure since I designed the sleep formula. But so one of the analogies that I use, like signal to noise ratio, it would be it. But have you ever heard of the Hooke-Weaver law in any of your?
I have some vague familiarity with it, but I can't place it.
So it's like the interesting thing is I came across it in a psychology book, never in physiology. But the gist of the Hooke-Weaver law has to do with vision and auditory, like responses. So the general idea is those systems are based on proportional change. And so instead of like a quantity of change. So the analogy I'll often use is imagine you go into a dark closet, you light one candle, wow, right? You notice a big difference in brightness. Now you go into that same closet, there's 99 candles lit, you light one more, kind of a nothing burger, right? Like the one candle was meaningless, it's the proportion of change. Mm-hmm. And that the ears and the eyes are akin to the receptors on our cells, right? My guess is the same principle drives physiological response no matter what the receptor happens to be, right? So that proportional change. So I think at the end of the day, there's lots of unknowable things, melatonin being an example. So then we're left to what are the principles that we might be able to apply? And so, that's my default, proportional change. So let's now take the mega camp, right? We give like a mega dose way beyond what physiology would be. We've now created a big proportional change. But so again, think in that signal to noise idea, we now have like a closet full of light, right? So now we have to keep giving that big change to create the same proportion. Mm-hmm. Where physiology is more nuanced, right? Like what we would see is in like a robustly healthy, say 15-year-old getting enough sleep, good circadian rhythms, they would make a big proportional surge of melatonin, like around an hour of when they go to bed, say 11 at night. But then the amount's going to go crazy low, by when they wake. Like, it's a darkness hormone. So at light, it's going to not be zero, but it's going to be close, right? So there's going to be this, at a physiological dose, a huge proportion of change. Mm-hmm. And what tends to happen, so say screens as an example, someone's, on their phone right in front of their eyes and at night, lying in bed, that's going to, because of the blue light blunt melatonin's secretion. So they're not going to have a big surge or as big a surge, right? So they're not going to get the same proportional change. They also may never get quite as low in the morning as that, robustly healthy. So they'll never have the right proportional change across the 24 hours. And to me, that's what would be important. So what that then means to me is intuitively, I think of, what you said agreed with you, a much more physiological dose, right, to create just, like a little bit proportional change without flooding the system and ratcheting up the background noise level. Mm-hmm. We want to keep the closet as dark as possible. Yeah. Now, does that mean that that's going to work for everyone? Probably not, right? Like some people, I tend to use the idea of useful. Like for some person, may it be a lot more useful to do a high dose and work for them. I wouldn't discount that. But for the globally, if I was making a product, I wouldn't chase that. I think,
Yeah.
like a low amount. And then part of the reason we didn't put any in ours, we consider Qualia Night, which would be our sleep-ish product. We actually designed it as a nighttime nootropic. So the idea was take it around dinner time to help create like a more relaxing window of time between then and sleep.
Got
And
it.
if you do, then you'll just more gradually fall into a deeper sleep. And then naturally you'll make the melatonin and the other things that your system's just better able to do that than, us figure out what's right for everyone.
Right.
Now, the other thing I think with melatonin that people don't always appreciate, it's considered a chronobiotic. So where it excels is at locking the circadian rhythm in time, not as, per se like a great thing for sleep quality. So I think it's often misused because people are using it for the wrong purpose. So it excels at that jet lag type of use case, or if someone has delayed sleep onset issues, to try to lock in their rhythms.
Yeah, especially like as you said, that big difference from the baseline to give a strong input for change in that sort of context. And it's worth mentioning, to put numbers on it, the physiological dose released into the serum is thought to be 300 micrograms, 0.3 milligrams, and it's common for supplements to be 10 times that much, like 3 milligrams as a starting point. And many of them are 5, 6, 10, 20. And there's many people who are recommending 50 or 80 or 100 milligram dosages, which we're now talking in the realm of 300 or maybe 350 fold greater than the physiological dose. And it's worth saying that there's definitely positive research on doing that in the context of certain disease models, but I think you and I agree that maybe that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea for healthy people not in those disease models to be using those amounts.
Yeah, you'd be creating that like a huge proportional change with that first dose. But what happens is hormones are made, but then they have to be cleared out, right? They don't just magically go away. So what you end up doing is spreading that surge curve out for a longer period of time. So it's why some people with high doses of melatonin will feel a little bit, I don't know what the right word, but not hungover, but still drowsy, instead of what should ideally happen is that before sleep, melatonin would have reached, or before waking, melatonin would have reached its basically background noise level, right? A low amount. And then cortisol would surge, right? To help with wake. What ends up happening if melatonin went too high, it starts to bleed into these jobs of other things. And then we'll need more to get that same proportional change, but now we're kind of having ripple effect on other things that may be interfering with. So, my bias when we created Qualia Night was just give tryptophan and cofactors in modest amounts to make melatonin. And for the vast majority of people, they'll make it if they have the resources. The other thing I think this is also underappreciated, there's been a few studies where morning light with enough tryptophan in the diet creates healthier melatonin at night. So you often don't need to go to the final thing. You just need the resources in the system and then the cues for it to do its job.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last point, back in the late 90s, Thorne, which is another supplement company I worked for back then, they call it microtonin. And it was I think it was either 100 micrograms or 300 micrograms, but it was that low physiological dose. And that's what I used with patients when I really needed something, was that the dose it sounds like you're taking with your supplement.
Let me talk to you about energy levels. So how do you conceptualize the body's regulation of energy? What controls whether someone is fatigued or highly energized?
I think that's super complicated, but I have a little bit of a mind-body bias, right? Like in terms of what's weighing us down. But one of the things I've seen multiple times is that, someone in their normal life, pretty hectic, they've got all like, they're holding it together. They go on vacation and all of a sudden, they'll get a cold, or they'll, all of a sudden need a whole bunch of sleep, or they, get sick. They, now sleep a lot. And then the aftermath of that is they feel like they need more sleep. And my general like saying and belief is if you can sleep, you need sleep. So, let's take depression and those things out of the thing. But what seems to me to be the case is our system's really smart. Like fundamentally, a lot of, what we take for granted is designed to keep us safe and alive more than anything else. And that, like sleep as an example, I was an officer in the Navy before I became a naturopathic doctor, and crazy sleep deprived just because of the circumstances, rotating shift work, you name it. And my body held it together. But at one point after the Navy, I decided one winter, I was living in New Haven, Connecticut at the time. And this was the late 90s when no one was really talking much about sleep, to basically say, okay, maybe I built up like a pretty big sleep debt that I'm not even aware of, right? Like my body's just, figured out a way to get by without it. Let me just, go to bed when it gets dark and sleep as long as I can and see what happens. So I started, this was winter, going to sleep around 7. I slept for 12 hours, no problem, wow, for about 2 weeks. And then like 11 hours. And then, like by the end of 3.5 weeks, I was back to 8. And for the first time in like a long period of time, my hands all of a sudden warmed up.
Wow.
Like my hands were always, I had done massage as part of like, a side gig as a naturopathic student. I always felt bad. Like I was one of those massage therapists that did everything to try to warm their hands up. And all of a sudden my hands were, like toasty for the first time. Right. So I think I had just, when I convinced my body, like, oh, take it, like, we're going to now make this a priority, it just pulled a bunch of that sleep debt out of the closet and repaid it. And so what I think often happens when someone starts to sleep a bit more, the super common piece of feedback I used to get is, well, Dr. Greg, this doesn't make any sense. Like now I'm tighter than I was before. And that's why it's like, oh, the system now, yeah, it's like I can now pull this thing out and finally get to it and work on it.
It's interesting. First of all, what you're saying is super interesting to me. And it's something I don't think I've ever heard somebody talk about before. I think my interpretation of it might be a bit different than yours though, or maybe it is the same. We're just talking about it in different words. But to me, it's almost like your body was in some kind of compensatory adaptive mode that was dealing with this chronic stressor of low-level sleep deprivation. And then when you finally allowed it to rest, it was like a reset for the system. The body got to go, oh, I'm finally safe. I actually can sleep the amount I need to sleep. I don't need to be in this chronic mode of trying to go, and where I got to function in the face of not as much sleep as I'd like to, where it's making these kind of adaptive changes, which interestingly you mentioned were reflected in the temperature of your hands, but probably would be also reflected in many other aspects of the way your body was functioning. It was like you used this conscious, dedicated sleep protocol of a few weeks to allow your body to enter a feeling of you can relax, you're safe, you take as much time as you need to recover. And in the context of the way that I see energy regulation through the work of Robert Naviaux's cell danger response model, kind of mitochondria in defense mode or energy mode, I would see what you did there almost as like a very intentional way to get your body out of of it being stuck in cell danger response in defense mode. And like you created an input with that protocol that allowed it to get unstuck and shift back into safety mode, energy mode. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of the lens through which I would interpret something like that.
And I think, not all cases, but just like sleep neglect is probably the main reason in society, where people just aren't making it as much of a priority. I think when you talk about energy, a lot of it is mismanaged. So like as an example, one of my favorite studies, I call it the multiple stressor study, but it was an Army Rangers study. And the gist of, it was they had noticed that Army Rangers often after the fact gained a lot of body fat at the point of the study. And the study is 15 or so years old. So the context of Army Ranger, experience in this study was sleep deprivation while they were out in the field, not enough food, crazy amounts of exercise, and cold, right? So stacking multiple stressors. And they looked at things like, thyroid hormone, like everything just tanks, right? Cortisol goes up, thyroid goes down, all these things that if you were to get a blood work and look at it, you'd say, oh, like you're hypothyroid or you're hypoadrenal, right? Like what they were is in need of recuperation, right? And so what then happens is as soon as they get access to food again, they obviously eat a lot of food that renormalizes some of those hormones, but at a higher set point of body fat, at least temporarily. Mm-hmm. And so I think what often happens in medicine is people do these well-intentioned lab panels, but then you're chasing effects, right? Like many of us have the multiple stress problem, maybe different stressors than the Army Rangers that are causing, our appetite to be increased, our metabolism to seem like it's slower, our energy levels to be reduced. And the goal isn't now to necessarily take armor thyroid or whatever the intervention. It's can we now get out of this damage or like damage response mode and let the system just rejuvenate and recuperate, in which case it's likely able to make all the energy we need. It's just saying at this point, I'm not going to make enough or all that energy because I want you to rest and recover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. What do you think about mental fatigue specifically, like brain related energy levels or mental energy? How do you see that, sort of what's your paradigm to understand what's happening there?
I think the brain's primary fuel is going to be glucose, whether we're ketogenic diet or not. We'll sustain blood sugar in part to make sure we can feed the brain. But I think what invariably happens is we regionally deplete that energy in the brain because we overwork one part. So like super common, right? Maybe you're a software programmer, you've been just staring at your screen, hammering out code, and now you take a break and what do? You look at your phone, right? Which is the same, similar, right? What you're using the visual system and some of the other thing, right? So the goal of a break would be, maybe do something like cellular, he would have called it deviation, do something drastically different. So I think what ends up happening, people don't practice deviation, right? When they take a break, they do something that's taxing the brain in a very similar way, where, watching clouds drift by or fish in a fish tank or, waves on the beach or running water, all those would use a different part of the brain, right? Like that will give time now for the brain to shift resources into where it had run low from where maybe some excess that weren't being used are. So I think energy is at the heart of things, but going back to that original idea, like, is there enough resources and then is there an obstacle? So like your cognitive formula, that would be supplying some of these resources, right? Things to make neurotransmitters and, adapting your herbs and things like that. And then, the obstacle in this case is that, you've overworked this one part of the brain. And then, we could talk about multitasking or other things. People, like our brain doesn't really, multitask in the way that we think it does, right? It does one thing and it, can shift so fast back and forth that we have the illusion it's multitasking. But I think, paying much more attention consciously to what we're focusing on and doing one thing, and then making sure we take breaks and do something drastically different makes a huge part in giving us a much more sustained ability to, be productive across our entire day. And then the thing I always look at, and I would guess it's the same for you, like if someone takes a nootropic, like I would expect, oh yeah, you're going to feel something ideally in the next hour or two, but what's happening at the end of your day? Are you a better version of yourself when you get home at the end of the day? Or did that nootropic just cause you to like, spin through resources faster at work, and you get home, and you're cooked and a mean person to the significant others in your life. So I always think,
and that's, that's a function of, to what extent were you sort of pumping the accelerator pedal without putting any fuel back in the system, or allowing the system to rest, just pumping fuel into it, or like just pushing the accelerator and revving that engine like crazy to the max, but without giving the system a break, right? Is that analogous to kind of what you're getting out there?
Yeah, like, so, I think like caffeine to me it's not an exact thing, but like that'd be more akin to turbo, right? Like it's causing the thing to use more fuel and resources, but you still got to supply the fuel and resources. And I think what ends up happening, people mistake the turbo for the fuel, right? Like, so, and that's why something like bulletproof coffee, as an example, I think agrees with a lot of people, because now they're giving fuel with the turbo, as an example.
What do you think about caffeine more broadly? Because I have a lot of thoughts on it. I'm hesitant to go into all the details, but my very short version of that is I think that caffeine is widely misused and is for most people counterproductive. Most people are using it in a way that is actually lowering their baseline energy levels. And it's kind of an insidious process, because they simultaneously think that caffeine is giving them energy, and they're unaware that it's also the thing that actually lowered their baseline levels of energy. As supplement formulators, you and I both, we know that one of the easy things that we could do to make people feel an effect from taking a supplement is throw a bunch of caffeine or stimulants in it. And if you do that, you will get a whole bunch. It's so easy, it's so easy, even a monkey could do it. And that as supplement formulators, wanting people to, in a way, there's a financial incentive to get people to addicted to the supplement, to get people to, certainly to get them to feel an observable effect, within minutes of taking it, but also for it to be addictive. Caffeine is addictive. So there's a lot of incentive as supplement formulators to do that, to throw a bunch of caffeine or other stimulants in it for those reasons, to give people that experience. The problem is that consumers are not educated enough in the science around that to know that if they use a substance like that every day, in large amounts, that their brain will undergo adaptations that actually hinder their cognitive performance and their energy levels. So for that reason, I exclude stimulants in caffeine from my brain formula. I'm curious what your thoughts are around this.
I tend to be a Goldilocks principle person. So, most things I don't view as good or bad. Is there just a right amount to get whatever job you're hoping to get done,
and used in the Goldilocks zone as far as frequency too. Like caffeine intermittently, I think is no problem and is actually very useful.
Yeah. So that upside down U we talked about with alcoholism earlier. Sometimes that's Yerkes-Dodson law is what you have, but my bias is that most things are going to track through that Yerkes-Dodson, right? So we've never had it. We start it, we'll adapt to it, right? We'll perform better for a while, maybe get to a plateau. And if we misuse it, we'll start to slide down the other side. And the things that dictate the amount of time before we track through that would be like caffeine was the original thing they studied in Yerkes-Dodson study, is the intensity of something. So the dose, right? So the analogy I'll often use, most of us, if we decided we're going to run a marathon every week for the next year, we'd track through that curve. Maybe some people wouldn't. I know my body would, right? Like I, adapt for a bit, but then I maladapt, right? So that intensity of exercise. But if conversely I said, oh, I'm going to walk, 2 miles every day for the next year, I'd still probably be ascending, like the better performance part, right? Like, because the intensity. And now if instead I also said, okay, I'm going to walk every day except, Sundays, and take that as a rejuvenation. Right now I've spread that time out even further before I'll maladapt, is my bias. So with something like caffeine, I think of it the same way as that exercise. What's the dose? Is there a dose more like walking and a dose more like marathons? Is there a way to, like you would with a smart exercise program, put, like a deloading phase in where you can re-equilibrate the system, right? Recover. And so, when I think of caffeine, I could just speak to my own personal use. I use a moderate dose of it on work days, weekends, almost none. Mm-hmm. And by a moderate, that's way less than like I remember a good friend in Mexico once I was visiting. This was when I was in naturopathic school, and he said, Greg, what do you think of coffee? Marco, what do you mean? Like, is it good or bad? I'm like, well, what are we talking about here? He's like, I have about, 5, sometimes 6 cups a day. And you probably learned this too. Like, well, how big is your cup? He comes and it's like, this like massive 32-ounce thing. And I'm like, that's my pot, right? So like, yeah, we're now, like well past that part where, like now he was running a marathon with coffee, right? So that's how I think about it personally. Like I'm almost, there's certain things that I don't do, like, so artificial sweeteners, things like that, I just don't have. But most things I just think in terms of, is there a Goldilocks thing? How can I, help people get the best response out of this, not just for today, but long term? And mm-hmm. often that's, a lower amount of something, and then prudent breaks, like you mentioned.
My last question to you is, as a nootropic formulator, what are your favorite nootropics?
Well, one that has been getting lots of buzz lately, and I know you use it, is the polygala. I think that's just crazily underappreciated.
Has it been getting lots of buzz? That's actually unbeknownst to me, because when I put it in my formula, it was like there was actually very little research on it. I was mostly going off the fact that one of the things that I do is not only monitor the research that exists, but if a new supplement comes out, what do the reviews of users, what does the user experience look like? And it takes a lot of time to read through lots and lots of, many hundreds, thousands of reviews. But I kind of see the nature of that. I try to assess, is this just a placebo? There isn't really any noticeable effect here. Or is this something that users are consistently reporting a very predictable type of effect with? And I included it for that reason, that it was something that seemed to get really positive user feedback.
I think in terms of like human double-blind studies, is not anything new. There's a couple that have been out for a few years. But in terms of user feedback, I've just seen that really blossomed in a few of the people I follow on, like in the Reddit community, on Twitter. And it just seems like that's one that's, like I said, you're an early adopter of it in your supplement. We have it in Qualia Night, but it's one that, and Subroxy would be the other one that I just see a lot of N of 1, and not in necessarily like a studied sense, but people using them to augment stacks of things. Yeah, and they seem to help. And then we're big fans of Celastris. At our company, we've done a couple A/B tests where we've had a formula with and without Celastris, and in terms of subjective experience of it, it's just always been consistent. People like the version with Celastris, and not high amounts, but that's handout every time I've run that type of A/B scenario. Mm-hmm. So those are 3 that I think are less appreciated. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's nice to have a conversation with someone who is technically a business competitor of mine, and just to have a really fun, very transparent conversation, and even get into some of the sort of the behind the scenes supplement formulation stuff that goes into that, both from the perspective of how we, assess different ingredients that are coming to market, and also the business side of evaluating these kinds of things, and if something makes sense, and the fisetin thing with ITP. There's so many complexities to it, and it's hard to be on the leading edge of it, because if we sat around and waited for every ingredient that we used in one of our formulas to have 12 or 50 different human studies on it showing, definitively, here's the randomized controlled trials done by third-party independent labs, well, we might be waiting for 30 or 40 years for a lot of those studies to exist on many of these ingredients. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it was an honor. It was a privilege to have this conversation with you. I really enjoyed it.
Me too, Ari. It was it's always fun getting to spend time hanging out with someone as bright as you are. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to make sure you give a shout out to the fact, we've alluded to this number of times, but let's just be very direct about it. You are with Neurohacker, and you guys do nootropic formulations. You have Qualia Night, you have longevity formulas, immune formulas. So just give a little spiel for where people can find your products.
Yeah. We're neurohacker.com. We're biggest on Instagram. That's where we put a lot of time into try to build a community and to provide a lot of content and information for people that may or may not want to buy products. I write blogs for neurohacker.com. Probably by the time this airs, our new product, Qualia Symbiotic, will be out. And I wrote about an 18-page crazy long blog on the gut ecosystem. So
awesome.
I think that would be worth people's time just taking a look at to learn more about some principles of how that ecosystem works.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, thank you so much. I look forward very much to our next conversation.
Thanks, Ari.
Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at The Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next